Hi Year 8, Mrs. Honey here again. I'm going to talk to you about variation and how we can adapt to change. So, introduction. My key word for today is interdependence, and hopefully by the end of the lesson you'll be able to tell me what that is. Our objective for today is to describe how an organism adapts to its environmental changes and to how competition can lead to adaptation. It's really important that you've got yourself a pen and a piece of paper or your book to write down some notes and to have a go at some of the tasks along the way. The first thing I've given you is some images. Have a look at them. I want you to describe what you can see in these images. You don't have to write it down if you don't want to, but have a look, see what you can see. Did you see me? If you looked hard enough, you might have seen that in these pictures there are some things hiding. They're hiding because they're using this idea of camouflage in order to hide themselves to their surroundings. This can be done to hide from predators and prey. Animals have a number of ways of coping in order to survive. One of their coping mechanisms is to identify the season, and they do this and they adapt to the temperature by either hibernating, where some animals will find somewhere warm to sleep through the winter, migration, where some animals will move to warmer climates or somewhere where there's more food, or they can grow thicker fur, and they shed that in the warm season, and when it's cold they have the thick coat. The picture here shows the snowshoe hare. During the winter it has white fur, which helps them blend into the snow, the camouflage like we saw in those other pictures. And when the season changes to spring and summer, their fur turns to a reddish brown, and this helps them to then blend in with the rocks and the earths in the mountain forests where they live. When they're blended with the environment, it's harder for the predators to see them. This means it increases their chances of survival. Camouflage is really important to a lot of animals, especially prey animals. Being able to hide is a really key for them to survive. So animals have what we call a predator-prey relationship. They have to adapt. They have to adapt to changes in their food supply, and they have to compete so they can survive and reproduce. When a predator feeds on just one type of prey, there's what we call an interdependence, that key word that I was talking about. The predator-prey population change, directly affecting each other. And when we plot it on a graph, we can show a clear pattern between the relationship. When the prey population increases, the predators have more to eat, and so they survive longer and reproduce more. That increases the number of the predators. The growing predator population therefore eats more prey, so the prey numbers then fall. Eventually, there's not enough food for all of the predators, so their numbers also decrease. The hare population can increase if the lynx population is fewer, and the cycle starts all over again. So if you look at the graph, it shows this common relationship between an increase and then a decrease, with a slight variation in that when one's increasing, the other one will increase slower. And then when one's decreasing, the other one will decrease also, but maybe a little bit after. So thinking about the graph that I've just shown you, this shows the relationship between the hare and the lynx. Complete the sentences of the relationship and what's happening. The words are given to you. The graph shows the interdependence of the lynx and the hare. In this example, the hare is the, and the lynx is the. When the hare population increases, the lynx have to eat. The lynx survive longer and reproduce more. This, the number of predators. The growing predator population eats more prey. The prey numbers, eventually, there is not enough food for all the predators. So the number of predators, there are now lynx feeding on hares, the hare population, and the cycle starts again. If you need to pause the video at this point so that you can make sure you can fill those gaps in and write this paragraph out, please do so. So we're looking at this idea of how organisms cope with change. Plants and animals can lose their habitat through fire or climate change. Their food supplies may also reduce by disease. Sudden changes results in increased competition for survival. The organisms best adapted to the change will survive and reproduce, increasing the population of that species. Organisms that are not very well adapted will have to move to another habitat or die. It's really important that we understand that that relationship within that habitat is dependent on the predator-prey relationship. And that predator-prey relationship has outside factors that can change it. And some of these outside factors are what we've just said here. Okay, so for this task, you're going to need a table drawn in your book or on your paper. I've given you an adaptation: food storage, hibernation, insulation, leaf shedding, migration, overwintering of pupae, retreating underground. I've also given you a description and an example of a species. However, they don't match. You need to make sure that you can match the description and the example with the correct box. So don't copy the table out, just copy out the adaptation in order, and then have a look at the description and copy out what you think should be the right description, and have a look at the example and put the example that you think should be the right one. Remember, at the end of the PowerPoint, I will go through the answers so we can mark this. So, carrying on with the tasks to help you understand this relationship. Task 3 is to look at the graphical data. Here, we've got the interaction scene between the species of a predator and prey relationship. Both organisms need to be well adapted to survive. Their numbers will otherwise become low and they could die out in an area or become extinct. So the graph shows the number of caribou in a herd, and the graph shows the population of wolves. Ultimately, there's a relationship between them. As the caribou increase, the wolf decreases. Once the caribou have increased to a certain number, the wolf population can then increase because it has more food to eat. Once the wolf has started eating the caribou will then start to decrease. The wolf number is going to then decrease because they're going to have less prey to feed on. And so the cycle continues. So, thinking about the graph I just showed you, describe the trend in the caribou population between 2002 and 2005. Suggest a cause for the drop in the caribou population between 2005 and 2008. Remember, it might not be just predator-prey relationship, it could be other factors. Describe how the wolf is adapted to be successful as a predator. What do you think would happen to the numbers of wolves in Quebec if the caribou evolved to become faster? And suggest what would eventually happen to the population of wolves if they did not evolve any adaptations of their own to counter the increased speed of the caribou. You're definitely going to need to probably pause this now and have a think. So pause the video and see if you can answer the questions. Okay, so thinking about interdependence and adaptation, I've put together here Task 4. Task 4 is a map of all the things that you should be able to identify and do. If you can, print it out. If not, you could always put it into your own PowerPoint, or you could take a copy of it and put it into a Word document, and then you can add to it. However you want to do it is fine. I will go through the answers again at the end of the PowerPoint and give you an opportunity to see what kind of adaptations you've come up with and how you can answer some of these questions. So, this last task is one just for fun, hopefully. In this grid here, there are some answers to these questions. All you've got to do is have a go and see if you can find the answers to the questions. So, an animal that eats other animals, an animal that gets eaten by another animal, the way organisms depend on each other to survive, grow and reproduce, a characteristic that helps an organism to survive in its environment, fighting with other organisms for resources. What would that be called? Differences in characteristics within a species, and organisms that share many similar characteristics and can mate to produce a fertile offspring. The answers to these questions are hidden in this word search. All you have to do is try and find them. So you might want to pause the video and have a look. I'm not expecting you to write out the whole of the word search, but just write down the keywords with the definitions that we've given here. Hopefully this will help you to identify the keywords that you need for this topic. So let's recap. What we've done in this lesson is to look at this idea of variation, how variation can happen, and the relationship that variation has with the predator-prey. Now I'm going to go through some answers. Get yourself a different coloured pen, make sure you mark your work, and make sure you make any corrections along the way. Okay, so task 1 should look like this. The graph shows the interdependence of the lynx and the hare. In this example, the hare is the prey and the lynx is the predator. When the hare population increases, the lynx have more to eat. The lynx survive longer and reproduce more, and this increases the number of predators. The growing predator population eats more prey. The prey numbers therefore fall. Eventually, there's not enough food for all the predators, so the number of predators decreases. There are now fewer lynx feeding on the hare, and the hare population increases, and the cycle starts all over again. If you didn't get it right, correct it. If you did, well done. So, task 2. All we had to do was identify the adaptation, the description, and give an example. So, checking yours. Hibernation is some animals will build a fat reserve and sleep through the worst weather. And an example of that would be the black bear. I know a lot of times when I would like to hibernate. Leaf shedding is when not enough light is, for photosynthesis is about, so many trees will lose their leaves. And an example of this would be the oak tree. This tends to happen in the winter months when the light is less. Food storage is storing food for the autumn to use over the winter, and squirrels do this a lot. They will gather up lots of nuts and hide them away in the trees, and then they have them for the whole of their winter. Overwintering of pupae, where an insect has a dormant stage to survive the winter. So the Arctic moth will turn into a pupae for the winter and then rehatch in the warmest climate. Insulation is where thick fur is and layers of fat are obviously put on. Rabbits do this, like the one we saw in the PowerPoint earlier. Migration is where animals will move to warmer climates. So geese do this, they fly to somewhere warm. Retreating underground, so some plants will actually die back and live underground, like the potato. So have a look at your answers and just make sure you've got them correct. Well done if you got them all. That was quite a hard task. Okay, so those 4 questions about that graph. The population of the caribou will increase. The increase will then mean that the increase in the wolf population. And sharp teeth, speed, eyesight, smell, and other valid adaptations would be acceptable for question 3. And question 4A should be decrease. And question 4B, they become extinct. If you don't adapt, you become extinct. Okay, so lots of information that you could have put on this map. So looking at that polar bear, explaining how they're adapted to survive. They have a small surface area to volume ratio. That minimises the heat loss. They have small ears and nose. They have thick fur for insulation. and they also have a thick layer of body fat. They have waterproof fur, which reduces the heat loss from evaporation when they get wet. And they are white, so they can camouflage themselves. What do the following animals compete for? Animals compete for food, mates and territory. Plants compete for light, space, water, minerals from the soil. The adaptations, then, of the desert fox, and to explain how they help. They have a large surface area to volume ratio. That means they can increase heat loss. They have large ears, which means more heat loss. They have thin fur to increase heat loss, and they have a sandy colour for camouflage. So you need to make sure they keep themselves nice and cool. Name the 3 adaptations for the prey that deter predators. That would be fawns, poison, or warning colours. How can human activity affect the distribution of an organism? They destroy an animal's food source or habitat, buildings, chemical, farming. They introduce the new competing species or global warming. So there's lots of activities that we do that can change an animal's habitat and therefore change that relationship. To explain how climate change may lead to a short-haired Arctic fox being more likely to survive than a long-haired one, it's to do with the temperature increasing. The short-haired fox is able to lose heat better, so it's less likely to overheat. The short-haired fox is more likely to survive and therefore pass its genes on. How can the following living organisms be used as pollution indicators? Lichens, they monitor air pollution. The higher population, the better quality air, so less sulfur dioxide. Aquatic invertebrates monitor water pollution. Concentrations of dissolved oxygen, and certain species can tolerate very low oxygen. Name the 3 pieces of equipment and state what they measure. Maximum minimum for the thermometer is the temperature, and the rain gauge is the rainfall set over a period of time. How is the cactus adapted to survive in the desert? Its roots are widespread, so it can collect water from a large area. They're deep roots, and they collect water because surface is likely to dry out quickly. They've got no leaves, so that reduces the surface area from the water that can be lost, and the stem is able to swell and store more water. What is a pollution indicator? So it's a living organism that shows the level of pollution in an area through change in its distribution or abundance. This one's probably one that's quite hard. You might have had to do some research. So what is an extra mile? So it's a microorganism that is adapted to live in extreme conditions. How are desert animals adapted to cope with very cold nights? They burrow and they have insulation. And many factors can cause environmental change. So give an example, a living factor would be like a new competitor, e.g. the grey squirrels. They came in and took the place of the red squirrels. A non-living thing would be, or a non-living factor, would be the change in temperature or rainfall. So, hopefully you have had a look at your work and you've made any corrections that you needed to. Hope we're understanding now about interdependence and adaptation and what adaptation's all about. Normally in this lesson, I would always ask you to draw an animal of your choice and identify some adaptations that it has. So for an extension for this PowerPoint, have a go at drawing an animal that would be adapted to live in the middle of a forest and see what you can come up with. And if you've got any really good pictures and you've got any really good diagrams with good labels, send them to me and I'll have a look. So that's Mrs. Honey, that's M for mother, Honey, HAUGHNEY at KnoleAcademy.org. Really like to see some of your work. It would be great. I've got many a house point ready to give out, and I might not be getting to meet you guys, but it would be nice to see some of your work. Hope you have a lovely time and keep revising, and I'm hoping that you're all staying safe. Bye.